My boss promised me a raise, but when I found out he was lying to my face, I turned the tables and got a promotion instead. The first time I realized I might be disposable was on my 31st birthday. No one at Holloway or Keene remembered, not even Janice from HR, who prided herself on knowing everyone's special day. I spent my lunch break alone in the corner cafe across the street, watching rain slide down the windows while picking at a cupcake I'd bought myself. The single candle stayed unlit. I couldn't bring myself to be that person who lights her own birthday candle in public. That night, I stayed until 10 p.m., finishing the Bristol campaign deck. My third consecutive week working past dinner. My phone buzzed with missed calls from my mother and sister, their voicemails cheerfully demanding I at least call back on your birthday, Claire. I silenced it and kept working. This wasn't how I'd pictured my life at 31. When I'd left Ohio 5 years earlier with my marketing degree and carefully ironed blazers, I'd promised myself I wouldn't become another corporate zombie. Yet here I was, Claire Donovan, Associate Marketing Manager at Holloway & Keene, measuring my worth in billable hours and PowerPoint slides. I had been grinding 12-hour days for almost 3 years at the kind of soul-sucking marketing firm where we're like a family really meant you're married to the job. The kind of place where leaving before 7 p.m. earned you raised eyebrows and taking a sick day required photographic evidence of your misery. The kind of workplace where the fridge had a passive-aggressive note about food thieves but never enough space for everyone's sad desk lunches. You're still here? I looked up to find Andrew Callahan, leaning against my cubicle wall, arms crossed over his custom-tailored shirt. At 42, my boss had perfected the art of looking perpetually refreshed, despite the same brutal hours he expected from the rest of us. His salt and pepper hair was always precisely cut, his shoes always polished to a shine. Just finishing up the Bristol deck, I said, straightening my shoulders, trying not to look as exhausted as I felt. That's what I like about you, Claire, he said, smiling in that way that crinkled the corners of his eyes. You get it. You understand what it takes to succeed in this business. I nodded, feeling that familiar mixture of pride and exhaustion. It was the small moments of recognition that kept me going in this place. The occasional nod from Andrew, the nice work email after a killer presentation, the rare invitation to sit in on executive meetings, breadcrumbs of approval I'd been trained to treasure. Come on, Andrew said, checking his watch. Pack up. Let's talk in my office before you go. My stomach did a little flip. Andrew's glass-walled office was where careers either accelerated or crashed. I'd seen colleagues leave that space with promotions, and others with cardboard boxes. 5 minutes later, I sat across from him in one of his sleek visitor chairs, trying not to fidget with the hem of my blouse. Rain hammered against the windows behind him, the city lights blurring into watercolor smudges. You've been putting in the hours, Claire, he said, leaning back in his ergonomic chair. Everyone's noticed. Thank you, I said, trying to sound confident rather than desperate for approval. The Bristol campaign is going to be huge, and you've carried it. He picked up a pen, tapping it against his desk. I've been watching you for a while now, the way you handle clients, the way you think 3 steps ahead. Not everyone has that instinct. I waited, hands folded in my lap, afraid to break whatever spell had prompted this unexpected praise. We're putting you up for a raise this quarter, he said finally, putting down the pen with a decisive click. You've earned it. The words hit me like a shot of adrenaline. A raise. Not just any raise. A mid-quarter adjustment, something Holloway & Keene almost never did. My heart hammered against my ribs. I thank you, Andrew. That means a lot. He waved away my gratitude. It's overdue. We should be looking at around 15%. HR needs to sign off, of course, but I've already spoken to Janice. Just need to file the official request. 15%. The number echoed in my head. That would mean an extra $10,500 annually. Enough to finally move out of my cramped studio apartment. Enough to start building actual savings instead of living paycheck to paycheck. Enough to feel like all these late nights had led somewhere. Andrew stood, signaling our meeting was over. Keep doing what you're doing. I see big things ahead for you here, Claire. I appreciate the opportunity, I said, standing on legs that felt suddenly weightless. I won't let you down. He smiled that trademark Andrew Callahan smile, confident, assured with just the right amount of warmth. I know you won't. That's why I'm backing you. The rain had stopped by the time I left the building, the sidewalks slick and gleaming under streetlights. For the first time in months, I didn't mind the late hour or the long commute ahead. I finally had confirmation that someone had noticed, really noticed, all the sacrifices, all the extra hours, all the missed family gatherings and canceled dates. I treated myself to a taxi home that night, a rare splurge. As the driver navigated through the littering, rain-soaked streets, I allowed myself to daydream about what the rays would mean. Maybe I could finally take that trip to Spain I'd been putting off for years. Maybe I could start looking at apartments in better neighborhoods. Maybe I could buy real furniture instead of the IKEA assemblies that dominated my studio. I called my sister back. Finally. Happy birthday, stranger. Megan's voice was warm, if slightly accusatory. I was beginning to think you'd fallen off the planet. Sorry, Meg. Work has been insane. I leaned back against the taxi's seat. But I got some good news tonight. Oh? I could hear her interest peak. Do tell. My boss is putting me up for a raise. A big one. Claire, that's fantastic. Her genuine excitement made me smile. See? All those crazy hours are finally paying off. Yeah, I said, watching the city blur past the window. I think they might be. At home, I kicked off my heels and poured myself a glass of wine, the good bottle I'd been saving for a special occasion. My tiny studio apartment suddenly didn't seem so bad. The view of the alley and dumpsters below my window transformed into a promise of something better to come. I went to bed that night feeling like maybe, just maybe, all the late nights and missed birthdays had been worth it. That perhaps I wasn't just another cog in the Holloway and Keene machine. That I mattered. If only I knew then that Andrew's smile was as thin as the walls he built around me. If only I could have seen behind those crinkled eyes to the calculation taking place. If only I'd recognized that in the corporate chess game, I wasn't a player. I was a pawn. But that night, wrapped in the warm glow of validation and promise, I slept better than I had in months, dreaming of corner offices and respect I believed I'd finally earned. I didn't know then how quickly promises could evaporate, or how the sweet taste of recognition could turn bitter. I didn't know that sometimes the worst betrayals don't come from enemies. They come wrapped in praise from those we trust the most. That would be a lesson I'd learn soon enough. Weeks turned into months. Each morning, I walked into the Holloway and Keene office with renewed purpose, chin a little higher, shoulders a little straighter. The Bristol campaign had launched to rave reviews from the client. My inbox overflowed with congratulatory messages from colleagues and team members, everyone except Andrew. I waited for the email from HR, for the meeting request, for any sign that the promised raise was materializing. Nothing came. By week 3, anxiety gnawed at my confidence. I crafted casual ways to bring it up with Andrew, rehearsing them in my bathroom mirror each morning. Just wondering about the timeline on that HR paperwork. Any update on when that adjustment might go through. But Andrew was suddenly impossible to pin down. He was always stepping into meetings, always on calls, always just about to deal with something urgent. The few times I managed to corner him by the coffee machine or in the hallway, he'd offer the same tight smile and vague reassurance. Soon, Claire. These things take time. Hang tight. I did hang tight for 6 more weeks. The seasons changed outside our glass tower. Summer heat gave way to autumn chill. My student loan payment increased. As it did every October, the rent on my studio apartment went up by $100. My car needed new brakes. And still, no raise. It was Maria from accounting who first planted the seed of doubt. We were both working late, me because I always did, her because quarterly reports were due. We ended up alone in the kitchen, waiting for the ancient microwave to heat our sad desk dinners. "How are you liking the new salary?" she asked, stirring her cup of instant noodles. I froze, container of leftover pasta halfway to the microwave. "What do you mean?" Maria's eyes widened slightly. "Oh, I thought. I processed a bunch of raises last month. I assumed yours was in there." "Who else got raises?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. She glanced around, though we were clearly alone. "Tyler and Sophia from your team both got bumped about 10% from what I saw." Tyler and Sophia, both junior to me, both with less responsibility, both with far fewer late nights and weekend hours. Must be a clerical delay with mine, I said, forcing a smile I didn't feel. That night, I couldn't sleep. I scrolled through months of email exchanges with Andrew, looking for written evidence of his promise. There was nothing. He'd been careful to keep it verbal. 2 days later, on a rain-soaked Wednesday evening, I stayed late to finish a presentation. The office was nearly empty, just security, cleaning staff, and a few other dedicated souls. I headed to the kitchen for coffee, taking the back hallway that passed by the executive offices. Andrew's door was closed, but I could see through the glass walls that he was inside with Derek from Creative. They were having what looked like an intense conversation. I would have walked past, but then I heard my name. I slowed, pretending to check something on my phone while positioning myself just close enough to hear snippets through the not-quite-soundproof door. "Can't keep putting Claire off forever," Derek was saying. Andrew's response was dismissive. "She's not going anywhere, too desperate to prove herself. But if she finds out about Tyler and Sophia, she won't. And even if she does, what's she going to do? I couldn't afford bump her salary right now, not with the Q4 numbers looking like they are. Maybe she'll quit on her own. Would solve the problem." The blood rushed to my face so fast I felt dizzy. The phone nearly slipped from my fingers. Derek's voice again. "You never even filed the paperwork, did you?" Andrew's laugh was short and cold. "Of course not. I needed her focused on Bristol. Now I need her for the Meridian pitch. You know how these things work." I didn't stay to hear more. Heart hammering in my chest, I retreated silently the way I'd come, abandoning all thoughts of coffee. Back at my desk, I sat perfectly still, staring at my dark computer screen. The office around me seemed suddenly foreign, as if I was seeing it clearly for the first time. The motivational posters. The company values painted in bold letters across the wall. The framed photographs of leadership looking trustworthy and visionary. All of it, every bit of it, was a carefully constructed lie. I'd given Holloway and Keene 3 years of my life. 3 years of missed family Christmases. 3 years of canceled dates and lost friendships. 3 years of just one more hour that turned into 4. 3 years of believing that loyalty and hard work would be recognized and rewarded. And Andrew had never even filed the paperwork. The raise was a lie. I wasn't just being underpaid. I was being played. That night, I walked home instead of taking the subway, needing the biting November air to clear my head. Rain soaked through my thin jacket, but I barely noticed. 5 miles and 2 hours later, I arrived at my apartment with numb fingers and a startlingly clear mind. I kicked off my wet shoes and made 2 lists in my journal. The first, reasons to quit immediately. Lied to by direct supervisor. Overlooked for raises given to junior colleagues. Undervalued despite consistent high performance. Toxic culture of exploitation. The second, reasons to stay for now. Need the economy uncertain, job scarce. 3 years invested, nothing to show for it. Yet, quitting, letting Andrew win. I stared at both lists until past midnight, adding and crossing off points as my emotions swung between rage and calculation. When I finally went to bed, my decision was made. I wouldn't quit, not yet, but I wouldn't be Andrew's willing victim anymore either. The betrayal stung like hell, but it had also burned away something dangerously close to blind loyalty. In its place was something colder and clearer. If Holloway and Keene was a game, I'd been playing by rules no one else was following. It was time to learn the real rules, time to play to win. I fell asleep formulating a plan, one that wouldn't just get me the raise I deserved, but would sure Andrew Callahan never underestimated me again. That night, after my shift, I texted Melanie from IT. We weren't exactly friends. Holloway and Keene's cutthroat culture didn't encourage friendships, but we'd bonded over late nights and mutual cynicism about corporate drama. O'Grady's. 30 min. Need to talk. I added. First rounds on me, knowing she rarely turned down free drinks. O'Grady's was a dive bar 6 blocks from the office. Dark enough to hide your exhaustion, loud enough to mask conversations from eavesdropping colleagues, and cheap enough for underpaid marketing associates and IT specialists. It was where Holloway and Keene's lower ranks went to decompress, while the executives swilled craft cocktails at upscale lounges downtown. Melanie was already at a corner booth when I arrived, her dark curls pulled back in her trademark messy bun, eyes fixed on her phone. She looked up as I approached, raising an eyebrow at whatever she saw in my face. "That bad, huh?" she asked, as I slid into the booth. I ordered 2 beers and a basket of onion rings before answering. Andrew lied to me about a raise. The words felt small compared to the betrayal they represented. Promised it 3 months ago. Never even filed the paperwork. I overheard him tonight saying he was just stringing me along to keep me working. Melanie didn't look surprised. She took a long pull from her beer when it arrived, then wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. Classic Andrew move. "You knew?" I pushed the basket of onion rings toward her, suddenly not hungry myself. "Not specifically about you, but he pulled the same stunt with Darius in analytics last year, and Rebecca before she left for Google." Melanie grabbed an onion ring. "Corporate 101. Claire, dangles the carrot, never delivers. Costs nothing to promise, and by the time you figure it out, he's extracted months of extra work." I stared at my untouched beer. "I feel like such an idiot." "Don't." Melanie's voice was surprisingly gentle. "Your problem isn't that you're an idiot, it's that you're honest in a place that rewards liars." I took a sip of beer, letting the bitter taste match my mood. I made lists tonight. Reasons stay, reasons to go. And denned. And I'm not going anywhere. Not yet. I straightened my shoulders. He thinks I'm just going to quit or keep taking it. He's wrong. A small smile played at the corners of Melanie's mouth. "Now you're talking. So what's the plan?" I hesitated. I hadn't actually gotten that far. "I don't know yet. Document everything, I guess. Maybe go over his head? Though I doubt Davidson cares." Davidson was Andrew's boss, the kind of executive who spent more time on his boat than in the office. Melanie leaned forward, lowering her voice despite the bar's den. "You want to go over Andrew's head? Go way over it." "What do you mean?" "Julia Rowe." The name hung in the air between us. Julia Rowe, Executive VP of Strategy. The woman every regional manager, including Andrew, bowed to. She'd been hired away from a competitor last year for an undisclosed but rumored to be astronomical sum, tasked with revitalizing the company's sluggish growth. "Julia Rowe doesn't know I exist," I said dismissively, reaching for an onion ring at last. Melanie gave me a strange look. "You sure about that?" Something in her tone made me pause mid-bite. "What do you know?" She glanced around, an unnecessary precaution in the crowded bar where no one from our office level would be caught, and leaned closer. "You know, Julia Rowe's been asking around about you." Quietly. "She's impressed by how you handled the Bristol launch." I nearly choked on my onion ring. "What? How do you know this?" "I handled her tech support, set up her laptop, her phone, her home office. She trusts me." Melanie shrugged like this wasn't the bombshell it was. "Last week her computer froze while she was reviewing personnel files. Guess whose was open?" My heart rate quickened. "She was looking at my file? Why?" "She didn't say, but she did ask if I knew you." Said the Bristol campaign showed exceptional strategic thinking. Her words, not mine. Melanie smirked. "I told her you were wasted in your current position." "You didn't." "Sure did." Melanie looked pleased with herself. "Look, Julia's building her own team, pulling people she thinks are underutilized. Word is she's got Davidson sweating bullets about who she'll poach next." I sat back, mind racing. If Julia Rowe had noticed me, had noticed the Bristol campaign specifically, there might still be a way to turn the tables. "Andrew must know," I murmured, more to myself than to Melanie. "Doubt it. Julia plays close to the vest. She's not like the other execs who broadcast their every thought." Melanie polished off her beer, "But if Andrew found out Julia was interested in you, he'd either try to block it or take credit for developing you." The realization crystallized something in me. Andrew's betrayal wasn't just about the raise anymore. It was about keeping me small, keeping me dependent on his approval, keeping me from being seen by people like Julia Rowe. "So what now?" Melanie asked, signaling the waiter for another round. I took a deep breath, feeling a new clarity cutting through my anger and hurt. Now I stop waiting for Andrew to recognize my value. I make sure Julia sees it instead. "That's more like it." Melanie raised her glass. "To burning bridges." I clinked my glass against hers, but shook my head. "Not burning, building new ones, better ones." We stayed at O'Grady's until closing, plotting strategies over progressively worse beer and increasingly cold onion rings. By the time I stumbled into an Uber at 1 a.m., I had the beginnings of a plan, not just for survival, but for the kind of advancement Andrew would never willingly give me. As the car pulled away from the curb, my phone buzzed with a text from Melanie. Forgot to mention, Julia's launching a new regional initiative next quarter. Big budget, bigger visibility. I stared at the message, a slow smile spreading across my face. The timing couldn't be more perfect. If Julia Rowe was looking for talent, I would make myself impossible to ignore. Andrew thought he held all the cards. He'd soon discover I was playing an entirely different game. I changed my approach the very next day. The old Claire would have charged into Andrew's office, armed with righteous indignation and demands for the raise she'd been promised. The new Claire knew better. The new Claire understood that in corporate warfare, the loudest voice rarely wins. So instead of confrontation, I smiled at Andrew in our morning meeting. I volunteered for the quarterly report he was sweating over. I stayed late to polish his presentation for the board, fixing the embarrassing typos he always missed. "You seem different," he remarked 3 days later, eyeing me suspiciously as I handed him meticulously organized client files. "Just focused," I replied with practiced neutrality. What I didn't tell him was exactly what I was focused on, and it certainly wasn't his success. I developed a 3-part strategy I called Operation Visibility. First, document everything. Timelines, promises, deliverables. If Andrew wanted a fight of credibility, I was building my arsenal. Second, expand my network beyond our department silo. And third, position myself near Julia Rowe's orbit whenever possible, without seeming desperate or obvious. For the first part, I created a detailed work journal, recording every project, every success, and every broken promise. I saved emails where Andrew took credit for my ideas. I kept a spreadsheet of hours worked versus compensated, cold, hard data that told the story numbers never lie about. For the second part, I began volunteering for cross-departmental projects. When the digital marketing team needed help with content strategy, I was there. When finance needed someone to translate marketing jargon into budget-friendly language, I raised my hand. I made myself useful. No, indispensable to people outside Andrew's sphere of influence. "You're spreading yourself thin," Andrew warned, when he noticed my calendar filling with meetings he hadn't approved. "Just making sure our team is well represented," I replied innocently. "Unless you'd prefer attend these alignment sessions yourself?" He backpedaled quickly, as I knew he would. Andrew hated coordination meetings, too much work, too little glory. The third part of my strategy was the trickiest. Julia Rowe operated primarily from the executive floor, her movements as carefully orchestrated as a presidential visit. But I studied her schedule through the company calendar, noting patterns. Every Tuesday, she spent an hour in the third-floor cafe, laptop open but clearly holding informal meetings. Every Thursday, she observed different department presentations, rotating through the company like a benevolent specter. I made sure my best work mysteriously aligned with her observation days. When I learned she'd be sitting in on creative reviews, I volunteered to present. When I discovered she frequented the cafe on Tuesdays, I began taking my lunch there, positioning myself within sight but never approaching directly. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about showing that I belonged at the table, not begging for crumbs under it. Melanie proved an invaluable ally. Through her IT connections, she kept me updated on Julia's movements and interests. "She's focusing on the West Coast expansion," Melanie whispered during a quick coffee break. "Looking for someone who understands both traditional and digital strategies." I filed that information away, then spent the weekend researching West Coast market trends and drafting a brief no one had asked for. 4 weeks into my silent campaign, an opportunity presented itself. The planning committee for the annual company retreat needed volunteers. Normally, I would have avoided such administrative tasks, but Melanie tipped me off that Julia would be reviewing the proposals personally. I joined the committee and immediately suggested a workshop on integrated marketing approaches for regional expansion, a transparent attempt to showcase my thinking on the very topic Julia was focusing on. "You're playing with fire," Melanie warned over greasy pizza in my apartment one night. "If Andrew catches on—" "He won't," I assured her, though I wasn't entirely confident. "He's too focused on his own advancement to notice mine." But Andrew wasn't as oblivious as I'd hoped. He began watching me more closely, his eyes narrowing whenever I returned from a cross-departmental meeting. Twice he assigned me last-minute projects that couldn't wait, forcing me to cancel strategic networking opportunities. Once he even showed up at the third-floor cafe during my carefully planned Tuesday lunch, sitting uncomfortably close as if marking his territory. "Anything I should know about?" he asked casually, but his eyes were sharp. "Just enjoying the change of scenery," I replied, closing my laptop where Julia Rowe's latest company-wide memo was open. I didn't let him rattle me. Instead, I doubled down on my work. But smartly, I volunteered for highly visible projects, then delivered them so impeccably that even Andrew couldn't find fault. I started CCing his boss on status updates for critical initiatives, framing it as keeping everyone in the loop while ensuring witnesses to my contributions. 10 weeks into my campaign, I presented our quarterly results to the executive team. Andrew had originally scheduled himself to deliver the presentation, but a convenient family emergency the day before meant I stepped in. It was the first time I would be in a room with Julia Rowe for more than a passing moment. I spent all night preparing, refining my delivery until every word felt natural. I arrived early, setting up my presentant and placing a printed executive summary at each seat. A small touch that didn't go unnoticed. "Thorough," Julia remarked as she flipped through the document before we began. It was the first word she'd ever spoken directly to me. The presentation went flawlessly. I highlighted our team's successes but was honest about our challenges. When questions came, I answered with confidence, never once glancing at Andrew's empty chair. Julia stayed after the others filed out, gathering her notes unhurriedly. "Claire, isn't it?" she asked, though I knew she remembered my name. "Yes, Claire Donovan. The Bristol campaign was your work, correct?" My heart skipped. "Yes, I led that initiative." She nodded, revealing nothing. Interesting approach to the market segmentation. Not what I would have expected from Andrew's team. Sometimes unexpected approaches yield the best results, I replied, holding her gaze. The corner of her mouth twitched, almost a smile, but not quite. "Indeed they do." She left without another word, but I felt something shift. A door hadn't exactly opened, but perhaps a window had cracked. That evening, Andrew called me, his voice overly casual as he asked how the presentation had gone. I gave him the bare minimum, downplaying the executive's positive reactions. Let him wonder. Let him worry. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It wasn't even about the raise. It was about proving to myself and to everyone who had underestimated me that I was more than Andrew's workhorse. I was Claire Donovan, and I was done being invisible. It happened on a Tuesday, the kind of day so ordinary it barely had a pulse. February had arrived with bitter winds and gray skies that matched the mood at Holloway and Keene. Q1 targets loomed large. The office buzzed with the nervous energy of people who knew their jobs depended on numbers they couldn't fully control. I'd been maintaining my silent campaign for nearly 3 months now. Andrew had returned to his usual routine of empty promises and strategic neglect. Apparently convinced my moment of rebellion had passed. He'd even started taking credit for my cross-departmental initiatives in his reports to upper management. Team collaboration efforts have yielded significant improvements, he wrote in an email to the entire executive floor, carefully avoiding mentioning my name while describing projects I'd spearheaded. I saved the email in my documentation folder and carried on. That particular Tuesday started like any other. I arrived at 7:30 a.m., beat the morning rush for decent coffee, and settled at my desk to review client metrics before the daily stand-up meeting. Andrew was out sick, a genuine stomach bug, according to his unusually terse email, which meant I'd be leading the team check-in. The morning unfolded without incident. I managed the stand-up efficiently, assigned priorities for the day, and was diff into refining our strategy for the Gartner account when my phone rang just after lunch. The display showed an internal number I didn't recognize. "Claire Donovan," I answered, wedging the phone between my ear and shoulder while continuing to type. "Claire, this is Heather from Julia Rowe's office." My fingers froze over the keyboard. "Julia would like to meet with you today at 3 p.m. Are you available?" My mind raced through every possible reason Julia Rowe would want to see me. Had Andrew complained about my cross-departmental work? Was I being reprimanded for overstepping? Or could it— "Miss Donovan, are you there?" "Yes, sorry," I stammered. 3 o'clock works perfectly. Good! 42nd floor, northeast corner office. Don't be late. The line went dead before I could ask any questions. The next 2 hours crawled by in excruciating slow motion. I tried focusing on my work but found myself rereading the same paragraph 5 times without absorbing a word. I changed my blouse in the bathroom, switching from the serviceable blue I'd worn that morning to the crisp white one I kept in my drawer for emergency client meetings. I texted Melanie, "Julia Rowe wants to meet with me. Today, 3 p.m. Her response was immediate. "Late? This is it. Don't panic. Be confident but not cocky. Let me know everything after." At 2:45, I took the executive elevator to the 42nd floor, a rarefied atmosphere I'd visited only twice before in my 3 years at the company. The air seemed different up there, filtered through power and privilege. Julia's assistant Heather, a poised woman with immaculate silver hair and watchful eyes, nodded at me from behind a sleek desk. "She's on a call. Have a seat. She'll be with you shortly." I perched on the edge of a minimalist chair, trying not to fidget. Through the glass wall, could see Julia at her desk, phone to her ear, gesturing emphatically as she spoke. Even from a distance, her presence commanded attention. Her tailored charcoal suit, her decisive movements, the way she occupied space without apology. At precisely 3:00 p.m., Julia's office door opened. "Claire, come in." Julia Rowe's office was a sleek, intimidating space full of clean lines and brutal honesty. No family photos, no meaningless awards, just carefully selected modern art and a view of the city that made it look like a kingdom she ruled. "Sit," she said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. I sat, back straight, hands folded in my lap, trying to project a confidence I didn't entirely feel. Julia studied me for a long moment, her expression unreadable. At 52, she had the kind of face that business magazines described as striking rather than beautiful, a distinction that nonetheless captured her sharp features and penetrating gaze. "Do you know why you're here?" she asked, finally. "I have some ideas," I answered carefully, "but I'd rather hear it from you." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "Direct. Good." She tapped a manila folder on her desk. "I've been reviewing your work. The Bristol campaign, the regional expansion proposal, the quarterly presentation you delivered last month." I waited, pulse quickening. "You've been with us for 3 years," she continued. "Still at associate level, despite consistently outperforming your peers." "I'm committed to growing with the company," I replied, the corporate platitude slipping out before I could stop it. Julia's eyebrow arched. "Are you? Because if I were in your position, with your track record and your current compensation, I'd have left a year ago." The unexpected candor caught me off guard. "I believe in proving my value before demanding recognition for it. A commendable philosophy, but dangerous in the wrong environment." She leaned back in her chair. "Tell me something, Claire. Has Andrew Callahan been developing your potential or exploiting it?" The question hung in the air between us, pointed, provocative, and impossible to dodge without lying. My throat tightened. 3 years of frustration, of deferred dreams, of watching less qualified people advance past me, all condensed into this moment of truth. "Both," I answered finally. "He recognized something in me worth exploiting. I've learned valuable lessons from that, not all of them the ones he intended to teach." Julia's eyes sparked with something that might have been approval. She opened the folder, revealing what I now realized was my personnel file. "I've been reviewing leadership options for the new regional initiative," she said, getting straight to the point. "Your name kept coming up, not from Andrew, interestingly, but from people across various departments who've worked with you. People who have no obligation to champion you, but did so anyway." My carefully built professional composure threatened to crack. She'd been asking about me, extensively. "The initiative launches next month. West Coast focus initially, expanding nationally by Q3. Julia fixed me with her penetrating gaze. "I want you to lead it. Full manager title, full manager pay, reporting directly to me, not to Andrew. Not a raise, a promotion. 2 levels up, reporting to an executive VP." "Why me?" I managed to ask, though what I really wanted to say was yes, immediately, without question. "Because you understand something most people here don't." Julia stood, moving to look out over the city. "The difference between loyalty and servitude. between ambition and desperation. She turned back to face me. "You've been playing a long game, Claire. I respect that. It's exactly what this initiative needs. Someone who can see beyond immediate gratification to the broader strategy." My mind raced with implications. The promotion, the salary increase, the direct line to Julia. And Andrew. My new position would place me above him in certain contexts, creating an inversion that would be impossible for him to ignore. Julia didn't even ask if Andrew had recommended me. Later, I found out through the grapevine he hadn't. Julia had seen through him all by herself. "Do you need time to consider?" she asked when I remained silent. I shook my head, finding my voice at last. "No, I'm ready. Thank you for the opportunity." "Don't thank me," Julia said, the ghost smile returning. "This isn't a favor. It's a strategic business decision. You've earned it, despite considerable obstacles." We spent the next 30 minutes discussing the initiative, its goals, challenges, and my transition timeline. By the time I left her office, my world had irreversibly shifted. In the elevator down to my floor, I caught my reflection in the polished metal doors. I looked different somehow. Taller maybe, or just unburdened. I pulled out my phone and texted Melanie a single word: promoted. Her response came seconds later: "Drinks tonight." No excuses. As the elevator descended, I realized I wasn't feeling what I'd expected. Not triumph, not vindication, not even relief. Exactly. What I felt was something calmer and more profound. The quiet certainty that justice, when it finally arrives, doesn't need to announce itself with trumpets and fanfare. Sometimes it simply arrives on an ordinary Tuesday, in a sleek office with a view, wearing a charcoal suit and speaking in a voice that brooks no argument. The announcement hit the company intranet on a Monday morning at precisely 9 a.m. Claire Donovan, appoint Manager of Regional Strategy Initiatives, effective immediately. I'd spent the weekend alternating between elation and anxiety, imagining Monday's fallout. Would Andrew confront me? Would my team resent my sudden promotion? Would Tyler and Sophia, who'd received the raises I'd been denied, undermine me? What I hadn't anticipated was the avalanche of congratulatory emails and Slack messages that flooded my inbox within minutes of the announcement. Colleagues I barely knew reached out with genuine enthusiasm. Several noted that the promotion was long overdue. HR sent forms for my new benefits package, including the executive health plan and doubled 401k match. By 9:30 a.m., Julia's assistant called to let me know my new office was ready. A corner space on the 38th floor with actual walls instead of the half-height cubicle I'd occupied for 3 years. "Your team introduction meeting is at 11, Heather reminded me. "Julia will be there, make it official." As I packed my meager belongings into a cardboard box, family photos, a dying succulent, a collection of pens I'd hoarded, I kept expecting Andrew to appear, but his office remained conspicuously empty, the lights off. According to the team calendar, he'd called in sick. Again. At 10:45, I took the elevator up to my new floor, feeling like an imposter despite the access card that now allowed entry to the executive levels. The hallway was quiet, the carpet thicker, the lighting somehow more flattering than the fluorescent harshness of the lower floors. My new office took my breath away, not because it was particularly lavish, but because it was mine. My name already on the door. My preferences already accommodated. Julia had remembered I was left-handed and positioned the desk accordingly. "Setting you up for success," she'd explained when she'd asked about my workspace preferences last week. "Small details matter." At precisely 11 a.m., Julia arrived with my new team, 6 people, all of whom had been selected from various departments for their specialized skills. I recognized most of them, had even worked with a few on cross-departmental projects during my silent campaign. "Claire will be leading our new regional initiative," Julia announced, her voice carrying the unquestionable authority that made her so formidable. "She brings exceptional strategic insight and a unique ability to integrate diverse perspectives. I expect you all to support her vision and execute accordingly." The team nodded, some looking curious, others appraising me with new eyes. None seemed resentful or surprised. Julia had prepared the ground well. After the introductions, as my new team filed out to give me time to settle in, Julia lingered. "There's a leadership meeting at 2 p.m., she said. "All department heads, Andrew, will be there." I thought he was sick. I replied, arranging my pitiful succulent on the windowsill where it might actually get enough light to survive. Julia's smile was brief but genuine. He made a miraculous recovery about 20 minutes after the announcement went out. Don't worry, I'll be there. When she left, I sat at my new desk, sleek, modern, with a view of actual sky instead of another cubicle wall, and tried to process how dramatically my life had changed in less than a week. At 1:55 p.m., I gathered my notes and headed to the conference room where monthly leadership meetings were held. My new badge granted me access to rooms I'd previously only glimpsed through glass walls. My new title granted me a seat at tables where decisions were actually made. When I walked in, several department heads were already seated, engaged in pre-meeting small talk. A few nodded at me. Others offered congratulations. I took my assigned seat, directly across from Andrew's usual spot. He arrived last, just seconds before the meeting was set to begin. His face when he saw me was priceless, a sour cocktail of confusion and rage he couldn't quite hide beneath a veneer of professional courtesy. "Claire," he managed, voice tight. "Congratulations on your new role." "Thank you, Andrew," I replied, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. "I'm looking forward to working with all the departments on this initiative, including yours." Julia entered then, ending our brief exchange. She took her place at the head of the table, her presence immediately commanding the room's attention. "Let's get started," she said briskly. "Claire, would you like to outline the Regual initiative for those who haven't been briefed?" I rose, passing out copies of the executive summary I'd prepared over the weekend. For the next 15 minutes, I presented my vision for the initiative. Confident, prepared, and fully aware of Andrew's gaze burning into me as I spoke. He clapped for me stiffly when I finished, while Julia sat 2 seats away, watching everything with those perceptive eyes. The meeting continued with departmental updates. When Andrew's turn came, he struggled to maintain his composure while planning his team's current projects. Projects I knew intimately, having handled most of them myself until a few days ago. "We'll need coordination between marketing and regional strategy," Julia noted when he finished. Claire arranged time with Andrew to ensure smooth transition of ongoing projects. "Of course," I agreed, meeting Andrew's gaze directly. "I'll have my assistant reach out yours." The words hung in the air between us, a subtle but unmistakable reminder of our reversed positions. I now had an assistant. He would now report to me on cross-team projects. After the meeting, as everyone filed out, Andrew approached me with a tight smile. "Quite the meteoric rise," he said quietly. "Must have friends in high places." I thought about the nights I'd worked until midnight. The weekends sacrificed, the broken promises and stolen credit. The documentation I'd so meticulously maintained. "Not friends," I corrected him. "Just people who recognize value when they see it." I wasn't just getting a raise anymore. I was now a department head, with Andrew forced to report to me for cross-team projects. The symmetry wasn't lost on me. That evening, as I boxed up the last of my belongings from my old cubicle, I found an old performance review from Andrew, dated 2 years earlier. He'd written, "Claire shows potential but needs to develop more strategic thinking to advance." I smiled, placing it in a folder marked archive that I'd keep in my new office. A reminder of where I'd started and how far I'd come. Funny how things work out. Sometimes you don't have to burn bridges. You just have to build a better one and make sure the right people see you crossing it.